Well, hello and welcome back to the show. We are in here this week with our good friend, Kaycee Parker. Hello, Kaycee.
Hello.
Yes, good to have you in here. You're a regular contributor to the show, and we appreciate you. And we always, generally speaking, we unpack a day of your book. And today we're going to be on day 17, Battle Weary. And that is the title. And we're going to actually do something a little different today. I've been getting a lot of feedback and comments from ladies in my group coaching circle and clients and just online. I mean, we can't help but um, read and connect with men too. I'm not going to single men out. Just their response to just the mental health challenges of type 1 diabetes. And I really thought this was and it fits into this chapter perfectly. So, like with the very first one, we are going to open everything up with a question or I should say some feedback that I heard. And then we're just going to kind of dive into that specific area. And yeah, so you speak, so day 17, as I'm stumbling, you speak so clearly in the emotional toll
hmm
um, in this in this particular day of the book.
Yeah.
And I also, again, I'm hearing from women every week online in my community of who feel this deep, exhaustion. And it's not just physical, it's not just the practical things, it's spiritual, which is things that we really like to grow, you
hmm
know, grow more attention to or direct more attention to, and the emotional toll that it puts on. So, yeah. So tell us about day 17 for you. If you want to give us kind of your highlight,
Yeah.
Kaycee, about what inspired you. And you do generally include a story
hmm
that refers to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, day 17, I called it Battle Weary. And I really just approached this one in thinking about the exhaustion. I validated it is really what I did. I went
Yeah.
to a few reputable sources and did a little bit of digging, and I'm like, it's no wonder we feel battle weary dealing with a chronic illness that never takes a break. And
Mhm.
so I wrote this devotion in the book because I feel like we may not talk about it enough. It's almost like there's a stigma attached to talking about it, like admitting we're human and we struggle, right? And that just leads us to thinking that everybody else has it figured out, and they don't. This is not easy for anyone, right?
Yeah.
Or that we're just really awful at managing our numbers. And that's not true. We got to give ourselves a little bit of credit in trying to manage this, but in reality, it's just the nature of the disease. And how are we going to handle it as best we can? So, I just feel like there's nothing good that comes from not being honest about things, especially this. There's nothing good that can come from that. So that's why I included it in the book. I just wanted to be authentic and real. And I wanted the reader to be able to relate,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
I'm not,
Yeah.
just because I wrote a book about diabetes, that doesn't mean that I have it all figured out. I don't have it all figured out. I'm just sharing my experience and the link that I have found between this and faith.
Yeah.
So that's really why I wrote it.
Yeah, yeah, and we do appreciate it, and if you are a new listener here, and maybe you've just heard about Kaycee Parker, definitely check out her book. The book is Devotions on Diabetes. That is what we are referring to, and I always have a link right here in the show notes that you can purchase the book. And if you happen to have it, we always encourage you to open it up if you're in a place that you can follow along as we're kind of looking closer at day 17. So the quote that inspired the beginning of this conversation is somebody who shared, and I'm quoting this: "The guilt and shame of not having a flat line." Even though it's virtually impossible. So, and of course, flat line meaning, steady blood sugar.
hmm
And I think what's interesting about this quote, this point that this person shared was knowing it's virtually impossible. And that really does. whether you call it perfectionism, managing our expectations, what's really enough, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's probably important to consider someone without diabetes has blood sugar fluctuations.
Mm, yeah,
I personally don't have experience watching someone who does not have type 1 on a CGM, but I know that's happened. I've heard it from several credible sources
yeah,
because our body fluctuates.
yes,
That's the way it is. And
yeah,
so to think like my goal is a flat line, I mean, sure, ideally, but how reasonable is that
yeah.
when there's literally no one that is flat all day long?
Hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
sometimes we have to manage our expectations with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so and that it goes to explain, so why do we feel ashamed or guilty, like a failure for not
Right.
hitting whatever that goal number is? And I think that's relative too. Whatever that, ideal blood sugar, because we're not going to call it perfect, we'll call it ideal goal blood sugar
Yeah.
is. And but knowing that maybe even our goals around that are not realistic. Just like you said, that's the point you made. It's like, we're hiding, we're putting too tight of a rein on and like with our CGMs, we can have our goal. I'm probably saying this wrong. Gosh, I wear one myself and I can't even think. Our time and range goals,
Yeah.
where we've got our low and our high. And then obviously what's in between that is where we want to stay and what percentage of time we want to stay, let's say between 70 and 150, maybe 160, whatever that number is for you. Um, yeah, it's very indicative. And I guess, and I think another thing, and we talk a lot about the tracking and, how all that's going to kind of reflect what we're doing every day, and it's constant feedback. So,
Yeah.
makes you
Yep.
want to take a deep breath, doesn't
It
it?
does. It does. And it's good to take a deep breath.
Yeah, yeah. So, how was the pressure over the years for you to
Yeah.
be, I guess, ideal? Again, perfect is, we'll say it, but we're not going to emphasize it.
Yeah.
Affected your mindset over the years? How
Yeah.
do you feel like you've become more realistic with your goals?
Yes, I do, over time. I think it's different though. Having had diabetes for more than 30 years, I really have only worn a CGM for the last several.
Hmm.
And so once you do that and once you see all the numbers, um, you start to kind of wonder, what were my numbers between when I was pricking my fingers? I don't know. So I have no idea. We don't know unless we, have all that data.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, I think so. I think I've learned to take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, stress is a bad thing for lots of reasons, but specifically to diabetes.
yeah, yeah,
And so yeah, I think it's been a struggle for me personally. I'm very type A, go-getter, do it well. That's just my personality. So I do have perfectionist tendencies. And that's a benefit when I want to put out a really well written, really well designed book. Um, but it's a hindrance when I start nitpicking myself. And so, I don't know, I need to celebrate a little more often, but I also do that better when I have a more big picture view. I have realized that about me. If I can take a step back and not be in the weeds so much, I tend to feel better about it.
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
concerned about this post-meal spike that happened one time when my percent in range for the week was where I needed to be,
There you
or
go.
wanted to
Yeah,
be, or what.
yeah, absolutely.
So I think the more I can not focus on the minutia, I do
Yeah,
better.
yeah, I totally agree with that. Yes. And you brought up something that I didn't think too deeply about until you said it was the fact that obviously now we have this, the CGMs, even glucometers. I mean, the fact that we can test. I remember not testing when I was early diagnosed. So there was no data. So I guess there was nothing to be there was no feedback to be worried or anxious about because we
Right.
didn't know. So
Yeah.
maybe that's the downside. And again, I am a big fan of CGMs. I'm very thankful for them,
Yeah.
but they can run our thinking, and again, what we expect to see when we have that constant feedback available for
Yeah.
us.
Yes.
That is something, isn't it? When you really think about it. Yeah, this is something
Yes.
else to,
You can know your blood sugar by checking whatever it is you check, right? What your phone or your
yeah.
receiver or whatever. You can just boop, know it. You got it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
And I think our mind, again, depending on how we are as people and how we think, and I loved how you were talking about, yeah, just the, just the, and it reminds me back to a coach that I worked with who just said, just aim for B plus work.
mm, yeah.
Just, just do it. Do your best.
Yeah.
B plus work.
Yeah.
No one else is going to notice the difference.
Yeah.
And move on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier said than done. Obviously with blood sugar too, there's, highs and lows are affecting with how we feel. And
Hmm.
it does impact, our environment and, the immediate. So I think, again, it's a very unique disease that has unique responses, that really does impact how we respond to other things. Yeah, there's way too many layers, but
Yeah.
yes, it's good to be able to talk about it, right?
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot.
So, when faith feels hard to access, this is
Mhm.
interesting, and it definitely speaks to you and I. So, this was something, some feedback that I received, and she shares. I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm so exhausted, I don't even know what to pray for.
Mm. Yeah. I know it.
Mm,
It happens. Especially when we have several days in a row or a few weeks in a row that are just really challenging.
mhm.
Um, and not just in the diabetes world specifically, but things in our life that are really challenging. And then that affects our diabetes, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
things can get really complex, very complicated. Um, it makes me think, though, of Romans 8:26 and 27. It
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell
And
us what that verse says.
yeah, it's one of the most beautiful setups. I think there's a lot of beauty in the Trinity of God, but this one says the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And I just think, man, when we have reached the end of ourselves, God has already helped us by giving us the Spirit to intercede for us in prayer. That's just, that's beautiful to me. And so I just think in those times where we feel broken and like we're just stuck and nothing's ever going to work, which we know maybe that's not true, but in that moment we just feel so heavy. Um, yeah, the Spirit intercedes for us, and I just think it's beautiful.
Of course, we have to allow that spirit and be
Right.
in, to be abide, to abide and to be in the spirit.
Hmm.
And the spirit knows us. He
Hmm.
does know what our troubles are.
Yeah.
And he wants us to ask. So
Yes.
again, and I think that's the kind of the intimidation sometimes that people have about prayer is what it's supposed to look and sound like and all of
Right.
that. But it's nothing fancy. It's
No.
just talk, just
Yeah.
speak, just share, just ask.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yep.
as simple as that.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So how can we keep praying or just showing up in faith even when we feel numb or
Yeah.
discouraged? Is this something that you can maybe give us something that's worked for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I get it because like I said earlier, you kind of come to the end of yourself and you're just like, I'm out of options, I'm out of ideas. I just am
Yeah.
worn out. Um, Honestly, we can always pray the Psalms.
Mm.
And God gives it to us. It's scripture we can look to. And I love that idea because the Psalms, if you flip through, especially a lot of the ones that David wrote, I just love them. But he's so real, very, very real in what he wrote, and honest and open. And this is my struggle. And by the end of the psalm, he's giving praise to God. And I just think it's such a beautiful, because God doesn't change. He's always worthy of praise. And so regardless of our circumstance, we can always give praise for God and who he is. But I think praying the Psalms is just a great way to help shift our minds and hearts. Um, I wrote a blog post about this. There's a free reading plan download that I did not long ago, and I called it Finding Strength in Weakness. And it's on my website. I know you'll link to it in your notes,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
I talk a little bit about diabetes, burnout, and control, and how our weakness is one way that God can work through us.
Hmm.
And anyway, read that if you want to dig into that. But and it also comes with a 14-day reading plan,
Okay.
just to help perspective on weakness because He works through it.
Hmm.
Um, and again, that is just such a beautiful thing because again, we come to the end of ourselves and we got nothing. Uh,
Mm.
but He can still work through it. He can work through
Yeah.
weakness.